the air in level B3 always smelled like damp concrete and burnt dust, a stale, echoing kind of quiet where every footstep sounded like a mistake. Darian Holt knew every stain on the floor, every flickering fluorescent tube that took 3 seconds to hum back to life, every blind corner that could hide a man with a gun. He walked the lane between the parked cars with his hands loose at his sides, the way his instructors had drilled into him years ago: never clench, never telegraph tension, keep your shoulders relaxed even when your thoughts weren't. Overhead, the security cameras watched in their indifferent arcs, the red recording lights like tiny, unblinking pupils. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Darian paused by the concrete pillar marked B3C, listening. The garage held that strange middle-ground silence again, not empty, not busy, just waiting. Waiting carried a sound of its own. He heard the soft tick of cooling engines, the distant whine of the elevator motor as it climbed toward the lobby, the faint echo of laughter 3 levels up where valet boys smoked on their break. But beneath all of that, there was a thin, wrong note. His skin felt it before his ears did. Something was off. He couldn't have explained it to anyone in a way that would have made sense. It was like walking into a room where someone had just been arguing, no raised voices now, no slammed doors, but the air still buzzing with what had happened. B3 felt like that tonight, and Darian's muscles responded before his reason caught up. He checked his watch. 8:42 p.m. 12 minutes. Elena Kwan would step out of the elevator and cross this concrete zone in exactly 12 minutes if her schedule held. The CEO of Halcyon Dynamics did not like changes in her calendar. Nor did the board. Nor did the shareholders whose security he was technically here to protect, even if most of them had never seen his face. His actual job title, printed in block letters on his badge, was Facility Security, Contractor. Disposable. Replaceable. Darian closed his hand around the badge where it hung from his lanyard and squeezed until the edge bit his palm. It was a stupid habit. He'd broken 2 lanyards in the last month without meaning to, the cheap plastic clips snapping under pressure. His old CO would have told him to lose the tells. The thought of his old commanding officer flickered through his mind like a slide in a projector: tan uniform, desert sun, a voice that could cut through rotor noise, but he let it pass. He didn't have the luxury of sitting inside old theaters right now, replaying operations where every command meant life or death. This wasn't that. Except his body hadn't gotten the memo. Relax, he muttered under his breath, the word more exhale than sound. He moved to the nearest access door and checked the lock again, even though he'd checked it 15 minutes ago and 20 minutes before that. Closed. Electronic reader steady in green. No sign of forced entry. No scratches on the metal. No tape over the latch. Still wrong, his instincts whispered. The Halcyon Tower rose 49 stories above downtown, a sleek glass monolith full of touchscreens and curated art, where coffee cost more than he'd once spent to feed 3 soldiers on patrol. Up there, the corridors smelled like citrus and new carpet. Down here, the building's heartbeat slowed and thickened. It was Darian's kingdom, whether anyone acknowledged it or not: service shutters, loading docks, the backup generators humming behind locked cages. In the parking garage. He knew who belonged here on a Tuesday night. He knew the white Tesla in B3 belonged to a senior VP who only drove himself when his driver was sick. He knew the Navy BMW 2 spaces down was the CFO's, the man parked it crooked every single time, as if the painted lines were gentle suggestions. He knew the dented red Civic with the crooked spoiler belonged to the IT kid who worked overnight deployments and always smelled faintly of energy drinks. And he knew the gray panel van at the far end of the road didn't belong to anyone. It had been there for 3 hours. Darian turned his head slightly, pretending to stretch his neck, letting his gaze slide over the shape of it. Plain gray. No logos. No company markings. Back windows tinted too dark for city regulations. A faint dust line along the silhouettes of its rear doors where a magnetic sign had once been and now wasn't. He'd logged it at the 2-hour mark. Standard procedure. temporary visitors got that long before someone had to take notice. He'd radioed upstairs to the operations desk, soft-voiced Debbie with her collection of floral mugs, and she'd told him what the system said. A cleaning contractor had checked into the building at 5:36 p.m. Temporary vendor badge. Name on the roster, I. Alvarez. Probably theirs, she'd said, and he could hear her shrug in the way the words came out. Probably, he'd answered. Probably didn't put food on his daughter's plate when things went wrong. Probably didn't get your knee rebuilt after shrapnel tore through it. Probably didn't kneel beside a shallow-stabbed man in Iraq and put pressure on an artery with your bare hands because his squat had relaxed around a probably. Darian walked toward the van. He didn't rush. Rushing drew eyes to you, real or imagined. He kept his pace even, the rubber soles of his boots whispering over concrete, one foot after the other like a metronome ticking down to something he hadn't named yet. His reflection flashed briefly along the side panel as he passed under a light. The man looking back at him hardly resembled the photo on his ID. There, his hair had been close-cropped regulation style, jaw clean-shaven, eyes bright with the buzzing clarity of recent deployment. Here, his hair had grown out just enough to curl at the nape of his neck. A few days' worth of scruff shadowed his jaw because he'd chosen sleep over shaving that morning. The eyes, though. The eyes hadn't changed. Same dark, watchful calculation. Same habit of measuring distances, angles, exit routes, always asking the same question, if it goes wrong now, what do I do first? He reached the rear of the van and let his hand brush the cold metal handle as if he were only steadying himself. The vehicle rocked ever so slightly, the suspension creaking with weight. Occupied. His fingers twitched toward the radio clipped at his belt, then stilled. Call it in. The thought came like a command. But call it into whom? Debbie upstairs, who'd probably put him on hold while she checked something in her system. The associate security manager with the expensive watch and the bored eyes, who'd already told Darian twice that week not to over-militarize his thinking. We're not at war here, Len had said, smiling like it was a joke. We never think we are, his old CO's voice answered in his head. Darian stepped back from the van, forcing his breathing to stay slow. He moved to the front, glancing through the windshield as he passed. Reflective glare met his gaze, the dashboard cluttered with paper coffee cups, an orange safety vest draped over the passenger seat. Nothing overtly wrong. Nothing overtly right. He memorized the partial plate number anyway. City. State. The first 4 characters. He would write them down as soon as he got back to the security office. For now, they sat in his mind with the bright, sharp clarity of things learned under stress. It had been years since he'd had to catalog numbers in the dark while someone shouted in his ear, but the skill came back as easily as breathing. Dad, you're doing it again. The words weren't real, not here, not now, but they flickered through his memory with his daughter's voice, wry, amused, too old for 13, wrapped in the soft rasp she'd carried since her last winter cold. Watching everything. He swallowed down a smile that had no business being in his mouth right then and kept moving. He dropped Mira off at her friend Evie's apartment 3 hours ago, exchanging the usual texts, send me a picture when you get there. Don't forget your inhaler. Call if Evie's dad starts watching those movies you hate again. She'd called just to roll her eyes at him, turning the camera so he could see her safe in the living room with cluttered bookshelves behind her. I'm not made of glass, you know, she'd said. Yeah, I know. He did know. But knowing and believing were not the same thing when your chest still remembered the hollow thud of mortar blasts. He finished his round of B3 and took the stairs up 1 level to B2, then to B1, cutting his route 5 minutes short. Protocol said he should loop every level twice before Elena's scheduled departure, but his instincts had shifted from vague unease to a thin, buzzing line under his skin. On B1, he opened the stairwell door a fraction and listened. Muffled traffic noises drifted faintly from the street above, honking, the rumble of buses, the never-sleeping murmur of the city. The garage itself sounded normal. A car starting somewhere, tires squealing slightly as someone took a corner too fast. The echo of footsteps. 2 sets. No, 3. moving with a purpose that did not match end-of-day employees trudging to their cars. He held his breath and let the sound paint a picture behind his eyes. The cadence was wrong. Too steady. Too light on the heels. That was training. One pair spread out from the other two, pacing their steps to avoid overlapping echoes. He saw them without seeing them, boots instead of dress shoes, weight carried slightly forward as if ready to move, breathable dark fabrics that didn't restrict motion. Adrenaline slid into his veins, soft as oil. He stepped out. 3 men walked down the central lane of B1 from the elevator side. At first glance, they could have been anyone, contractors finishing a late job, junior associates who'd lost track of time. They carried tool cases and a coil of cable, one pushing a yellow rolling bin marked maintenance. High-vis vests. Hard hats. Clipboards. If you took them in casually, they were invisible. Darian did not take anything in casually. He watched the way the one on the left scanned the roofline instead of the cars, his gaze flicking up to where cameras sat in domes of smoked glass. He watched the one on the right adjust his glove in a motion that took a fraction too long, fingers checking more than just fit. The middle one carried the clipboard, but his hand didn't rest on it, it hovered a few inches away like he was used to reaching for something else. Like a weapon. "Evening," Darian called. His voice bounced off the concrete and came back to him warped, but it did what he needed it to. All 3 men looked at once. The middle one pasted on a quick, efficient smile. Average height, tan skin, dark hair trimmed close to the scalp. His eyes, though, stayed flat. "Evening, sir," he answered. His badge, clipped to his vest, swung as he walked. Darius Alvarez, the printed label read. Maintenance. The name jabbed at Darian's attention. Alvarez, Debbie's system had said. Not Darius. And yet the first initial matched. Could be the same guy. Could be a brother. Could be a forgery. Didn't realize we had maintenance scheduled this late. Darian kept his tone light, conversational. He walked toward them as if drawn by boredom rather than suspicion. "Emergency call," the man said. "Water leak on 37. It dripped into one of the server rooms. You know how IT gets." His accent was neutral, the flattened kind that came from growing up everywhere and nowhere. The 2 men behind him said nothing. Darian's radio crackled softly at his hip, as if it knew it should be part of the conversation. He kept his hands visible, palms slightly open. "You check in at the front desk?" "Sure did." "Got the all clear?" Darian smiled like someone who'd been reassured. "Right. Just didn't recognize the van." "Vendor fleet." The man shrugged. "They move them around." One of the guys behind him shifted just enough that Darian saw the bulge under his vest where no tool should be. Not the square outline of a radio, either. Higher. More snug against the ribs. The buzzing in his nerves sharpened. "New faces?" Darian asked. "I'm down here most nights." "You guys out of North Point?" He tossed out a random name of a building on the other side of town. "Yeah," the man said immediately. Too immediately. Darian let his smile widen a fraction. "Huh. Small world. You know Rob up there?" The man hesitated. It was half a second. 2 heartbeats. Nothing. Everything. He didn't know the Rob Darian had just invented. They weren't from North Point. In another life, Darian might have played it out longer. Smiled more. Pretended to be reassured while he quietly called upstairs. But he measured distances without meaning to, between himself and the trio, between them and the elevator, between the elevator and the CEO who would step into it in roughly 9 minutes. There wasn't enough time to be subtle. "Funny," he said softly. The man's eyes changed. They didn't narrow. They didn't flare. They just focused. Like a lens clicking from soft to sharp. "You want to call this in?" the man asked. The casual facade was gone now. His tone stayed level, but something in it acknowledged what they both knew. This moment was the pivot. If Darian said yes, if he put his hand to his radio, if he reached for protocol, they would act. He saw it as clearly as if someone had written a script and handed him the pages. He thought of Mira asleep maybe already, hair tangled over her pillow, one hand curled next to her face. He thought of Elena Kwan upstairs, wrapping up a late investor call, trusting the layers of security Halcyon had paid for. He thought of the gray van on B3 with its rocking suspension and magnetic scarred doors. His heart started beating harder. His pulse did not speed up. He held the man's gaze. "Nah," he said. "Just doing my walk. You boys have a good night." He pivoted out of their path, giving them room to pass. The man with the clipboard nodded once, his eyes lingering on Darian a shade too long. As they moved by, he caught the faint chemical tang of gun oil under whatever generic detergent they'd splashed on their uniforms. He waited until they turned into the lane that led toward the elevator, then brought his radio up. "Ops, this is Holt on B1, he said softly. "Go ahead, Holt," Debbie answered, her voice smoothed by speakers and distance. "I've got 3 maintenance guys headed for the main elevator. Can you confirm their work order?" "I already told you, there." Debbie. He almost never used her name on channel. He heard his own urgency thin his voice. "Confirm it. Now. Please." There was a pause. He pictured her straightening in her swivel chair, fingers moving over her keyboard. Holt, I've only got one Alvarez log for today. In at 5:36. Out at 7:05. Out? Yeah. System says he left. No current open work orders marked emergency. I don't see anything." The men were 20 yards from the elevator now. Darian started walking again, maintaining distance, measuring. "Debbie, I need you to lock out the main elevators from parking to floor 40. Right now." "I can't, Len has to authorize that." "Get Len," Darian said. "Tell him Holt says this is not a drill." Static hissed. Keys clacked faintly through the speaker. Somewhere above his head, the elevator cables thrummed. "Holt, Len says we don't lock the elevators for vendor discrepancies. He says you're over. Tell Len he can either lock them now or explain to the board why their CEO is dead in a garage," Darian snapped. The words came out sharper than he meant them to, but he didn't regret it. Silence. Then, "Stand by." He didn't have time to stand by. He broke into a jog. The 3 men reached the elevator lobby. The one with the clipboard swiped a badge over the reader panel and pressed the button. The doors stayed closed, the floor display frozen. Come on. Upstairs, if Len had any sense at all, he'd be punching in override commands, sweating through his dress shirt as he realized this was bigger than a board contractor with too much training. The man with the clipboard pressed the button again. Still nothing. He turned his head, scanning the garage. His gaze found Darian in an instant, like he'd known exactly where he'd be. Their eyes locked across the lane. Now it was out in the open. No pretending. No probably. The man lifted his hand slightly, 2 fingers brushing his ear. A tiny movement. An old, familiar signal. Darian's mind translated it without thinking. Comms check. Change of plan. Execute contingency. The other 2 men shifted subtly, backs angling toward the elevator alcove, bodies creating a casual-looking triangle of space. Time stretched. Darian didn't slow. He had no weapon. Contract security on site were explicitly unarmed. Halcyon had chosen to outsource armed response to a private firm that would take 8 to 10 minutes to arrive on a good day. His sidearm sat at home in a lockbox because he refused to let Mira grow up in a house where guns were just another piece of furniture. He had 13 scars he could see in the mirror and several he couldn't. He had a rebuilt knee that ached in the rain. He had a daughter who laughed with her whole face and a job that barely paid for both of their inhalers. And he had training. Muscle memory was a kind of weapon. "Debbie," he said into the radio, not looking away from the trio. "Where's Ms. Kwan right now?" Conference room 42, Debbie's voice came, breathless. She's scheduled to leave at 8:55. They just wrapped the call early. Len says she'll be heading down in, A ding echoed faintly from above. In about a minute, Debbie finished, her voice shrinking. 60 seconds. The assassins, because that's what they were now, no more soft words, stood beside the locked elevator doors, their faces carefully blank. The van waited on B3. The cameras watched. His radio crackled. Holt, Len's voice cut in, annoyed and brittle, we're not locking down the building over your suspicions. Stand down and quit harassing our vendors. If there's an issue, escorts will. Darian clicked his radio off. He couldn't afford Len's voice in his ear. The elevator indicator above the doors flickered, then began its descent, numbers counting down from 42. 41. 40. 39. Each illuminated digit turned the buzzing in his veins into something cold and precise. His world narrowed to a triangle drawn between himself, the elevator, and the three men waiting. He walked faster. He watched their hands. He watched their breathing. He watched the micro-expression that twitched at the corner of the leader's mouth as the numbers hit 33 and kept dropping. This was the part most people never understood when they watched action movies. They thought gunfights were chaos, explosions and screaming and people diving for cover. Real violence, the kind Darian had seen and survived, started quiet. It started with men watching other men, with breaths held, with tiny decisions made in the space between heartbeats. He stepped into the open lane just as the indicator slid past 20. Hey, he called. 3 heads turned. If you're really here for a water leak, Darian said, you'll want to take service elevator too. This one doesn't go to the 30 floors. That was a lie. All the elevators went everywhere. But his tone carried an easy authority, the voice of someone who spent his whole life in this concrete underworld and knew every panel and cable. The leader's gaze flicked to the floor indicator, then back to Darian. He didn't argue. He simply reached into the yellow maintenance bin. Darian was already moving as the man's hand disappeared beneath the plastic lid. His body reacted before his mind finished the picture, a gun nested under coiled hoses or extension cords, wrapped in a cloth to muffle any accidental clink. The bin was the perfect concealment, innocuous, portable, forgettable. He sprinted. In that instant, the world fractured into frames. Frame 1, his boots left the ground as he pushed off, me pulling a familiar ache that he ignored. The distance between them was 6 meters. He could cross it in under 2 seconds if he didn't slip. Frame 2, the nearest assassin, a tall, broad-shouldered man, turned toward him, right hand going for his own vest, fingers hooking under the fabric at rib height. Frame 3, the elevator indicator slid past 10. Frame 4, behind the closed doors, somewhere far above, Elena Kwan stepped into a box of metal and glass, oblivious. Frame 5, Darian's radio bounced against his hip, silent, useless. Frame 6, the leader's hand emerged from the bin holding not a gun but a compact black device the size of a deck of cards, antenna folded. A jammer. They were going to cut comms. Down. Darian shouted, the word ripped from somewhere deep in his chest. Nobody moved. They weren't the ones he was warning. He was shouting at the cameras. His mind, always running 5 seconds ahead in a dozen directions, calculated angles. If security review ever looked at the footage, and if the cameras weren't already fried, he wanted there to be no doubt in anyone's mind that he had seen, understood, acted. He wasn't going to be the man the report blamed for hesitating. The leader's thumb pressed a button on the jammer. The air felt like it thickened. The faint hiss in Darian's earpiece cut off completely. Above them, somewhere in the walls, the building's wireless arteries constricted. 8. 7. The elevator hummed. The tall man drew his concealed pistol in a movement so smooth Darian knew he'd done it 1,000 times. The barrel began to swing toward him. Darian shifted his weight, driving his heel down into the concrete and launching himself to the side as the first shot cracked the garage open. The world tilted. The sharp smell of gunpowder punched the air. A camera dome exploded in a spray of glass, raining down like glittering hail. Darian hit the floor hard, rolling, pain flaring bright along his rebuilt knee. The elevator indicator flashed past 3. He knew, deep in the animal part of his brain that had kept him alive in places worse than this, that he had maybe 12 seconds to change the shape of what was about to happen. 12 seconds between Elena stepping out and 3 trained men executing whatever they had been paid to do. 12 seconds between his daughter's world staying intact and shattering in ways she would never recover from. He sucked breath into his lungs and pushed up from the concrete as the assassins adjusted their stances, recalibrating, their faces gone cold and efficient. The elevator chimed. The doors began to slide open. And Darian Holt moved. Darian Holt moved. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. He drove off his back foot in a low burst, closing the last 2 meters like the ground itself was helping him. The second shot cracked past his left shoulder, hot air kissing his ear as the bullet punched a starburst into the pillar behind him. Concrete dust sprayed his face. He didn't blink. His hands found the tall gunman's wrist a fraction before the man finished adjusting his aim. Years of drills roared through his muscles like an old song. Thumb to tendon. Rotate. Step in. Own the line. He wrenched the wrist sideways and down, dragging the man's center of gravity with it. Pain flashed across the assassin's face, his fingers spasming just enough for the muzzle to can off target. Third shot went wild, ricocheting off the floor in a screaming spray of sparks. Darian drove his shoulder into the man's chest, using his own forward momentum like a battering ram. They slammed into the concrete wall beside the elevator so hard that the impact reverberated in his teeth. The pistol clattered from the assassin's hand, skittering across the floor toward the maintenance bin. The leader's eyes flicked to it. Too late. The elevator doors had already opened. Elena Kwan stepped out in a dark blue suit, phone still in her hand, talking numbers in the calm, clipped tone she used for people who thought they were more important than they were. Her bodyguard, Halcyon's lone executive close protection officer, stood half a step behind her, scanning the almost empty garage with professional boredom. His gaze landed on Darian grappling with a man in a high-vis vest. His mouth dropped open. Everything happened at once. The leader dove for the fallen pistol. The third man pivoted, drawing his own gun, mouth tightening in concentration. Elena's bodyguard froze for a single, fatal heartbeat. Darian let go of the tall man's wrist and snapped his elbow backward in a savage arc. Bone met nose with a crunch that vibrated up his arm. Warmth spattered his neck, blood, not his, and the tall man dropped to one knee, hands flying to his face. Gun! Darian roared. His voice finally broke through the executive shock. Training kicked in. The bodyguard lunged forward, reaching inside his jacket for his own weapon. He was never going to make it in time. The leader's fingers closed around the fallen pistol. Darian didn't think. He didn't weigh options. His world shrank to a single geometry problem: distance, angle, trajectory. He kicked the maintenance bin. Hard. The yellow plastic cart lurched, wheels squealing as it slammed sideways into the leader's hand. The force wasn't enough to knock the pistol free, but it jostled his aim. The first shot meant for Elena slammed into the elevator's metal frame, shredding stainless steel instead of flesh. Screams exploded behind her. Someone was in the elevator, assistants, maybe, or another executive on their way down. The sound sliced through the concrete air like glass. Back! Darian shouted, but Elena was already moving, instinct sharper than he'd given her credit for. She dove sideways behind a concrete pillar, heels skidding. The bodyguard grabbed her by the arm and yanked her the rest of the way, putting his own body between her and the gunman. The third assassin fired. The bodyguard jerked as if a wire had been yanked through his chest. The bullet punched through his shoulder, twisting him sideways. He hit the floor on his knees, gun clattering from his hand to spin out of reach. Darian saw it land. He also saw the leader's pistol tracking toward him. He moved the only direction that made sense. Forward. He threw himself at the leader, leading with his injured knee because he didn't have time to protect it. Pain screamed up his leg, white-hot, as his kneecap slammed into the man's thigh. The leader grunted but stayed upright, gun bucking in his hand. Flash. Bang. Heat. For a second, the universe narrowed to the muzzle flare blooming inches from Darian's ribs. Something punched him, hard, just beneath his left collarbone. Not there, he thought wildly. Anywhere but there. His brain expected fire. Expected the wet, sucking absence of air that came with a chest wound. Instead, he felt a blunt, bruising impact and the crackle of electricity across his skin. The radio. The bullet had hit the radio clip to his vest. The force knocked him sideways. He let it carry him into the leader, converting impact into motion, wrapping an arm around the man's gun hand. They crashed together into the maintenance bin and went down in a tangle of limbs and plastic and scattered tools. The pistol barked again, wild, rounds slamming into the concrete ceiling. The taste of cordite and dust filled his mouth. Some part of him catalogued the details with the cool precision of a report he'd one day write. First round took out the camera, second missed high left, third into the frame, fourth into his radio, fifth into the ceiling. 5 rounds gone. How many left in the magazine? 15 round capacity, maybe, unless they'd downloaded to prevent spring fatigue. 10? 11? Too many. He drove his thumb into the pressure point at the base of the leader's thumb, twisting the man's wrist until the tendons bunched like cables under his hand. The fingers opened. The gun dropped. Darian snatched it even as they rolled, his own breath ragged in his ears. The third assassin was moving again, angling to flank, using the parked cars as cover. His eyes were cold, steady, calculating. He raised his pistol. Darian had a clean line. 1 shot. Center mass. His finger tightened on the trigger, and stopped. Myra's face flashed behind his eyes, superimposed over the man's. Not because the assassin looked like her, he didn't, not remotely, but because somewhere, out there in the city, a kid was going to get a call one day she would never forget if Darian finished this movement. He'd killed before. Combat didn't work any other way. He'd gone home with blood under his nails that wasn't his. He'd written letters for men who hadn't made it, to mothers who would never hear the full truth. This was different. This was home. The garage echoed with Elena's muffled curse, the bodyguard's labored breathing, the thick, heavy staccato of his own heart. He adjusted his aim a fraction. Lower. He squeezed. The gun kicked in his hand, a familiar recoil. The bullet shattered the assassin's right kneecap instead of his chest. The man screamed, a raw, tearing sound that bounced off the low ceiling. He crumpled forward, leg folding the wrong way, pistol firing once into the floor. Concrete chipped. Tires hissed as rubber met jagged stone. The tall man, still clutching his broken nose, lunged at Darian from behind, arms hooking around his neck. A choke. Not today, Darian rasped. He dropped his center of gravity and rolled his hips, dragging the man's weight forward. The grip faltered just enough for him to slip 2 fingers under the attacker's forearm, prying space for air. He jammed his elbow backward into the man's ribs. Once, twice, a third time. A breathless grunt, hot against his ear. He twisted sideways, using the man's own momentum to send them both crashing into the parked BMW. The luxury vehicle rocked on its suspension, alarm system waking with a shrill, panicked wail. Lights flashed. Sound blared. Good. Noise meant attention. Attention meant witnesses. Witnesses meant this didn't vanish into a neat internal memo about an incident in the garage. The leader scrambled to his feet amidst the scattered tools, eyes narrowed, gauging. Abort, the kneecapped man gasped from the floor, voice shrill with pain. The leader didn't answer him. His gaze cut past Darian, toward the pillar where Elena crouched. 1 shot. A clean line around the edge. Darian saw the calculation in his eyes and knew exactly what the man was about to decide. No witnesses. Targets first. Then site cleanup. The leader bent, grabbed a wrench from the scattered tools, and flung it with startling speed at the flickering camera above the elevator. The lens shattered. Glass rained down, catching the strobing BMW lights. He didn't want this on tape. Darian forced his body into motion again. His knee felt like it was full of ground glass, but he pushed off anyway, shoulders burning, lungs scraping for air that tasted like exhaust and fear. He hit the leader at a diagonal angle this time, aiming not for the gun hand, empty now, but for the hips, the balance point. They slammed together, boots skidding on dust. The leader recovered fast, hooking a foot behind Darian's and twisting. Darian went down hard, his back slamming into the unforgiving floor. The leader landed on top of him, forearm driving into his throat. "Should have stayed in your lane, hero," the man hissed. Spots danced at the edges of Darian's vision. He could feel the pulse in his temples hammering, his body fighting for oxygen. He let his arms go limp. The leader pressed harder. Pressure increased. The world narrowed to a hot, roaring tunnel. Then Darian struck. He brought his knees up sharply between their bodies and snapped his hips, rolling them sideways. At the same time, his right hand shot under the leader's vest, fingers searching for the telltale bulge of a holster on the man's opposite side. Found it. He yanked. The backup gun came free in a smooth, practiced arc. He didn't have the angle for a shot, not without risking a spinal reflex that could squeeze the trigger while the barrel still pointed at Elena's pillar. So he did the next best thing. He smashed the pistol sideways into the man's temple. Once. Twice. 3 times. The leader's eyes rolled back for a blink-long instant. Darian took that instant and drove his free hand into the man's throat, fingers compressing the carotid artery. Not enough to kill. Enough to starve the brain. Count. 1. 2. 3. The leader went limp. Darian shoved him off and rolled onto his hands and knees, chest heaving, every muscle buzzing. He did a threat sweep automatically. Tall man, on the ground, groaning, one hand pressed to his ribs, the other braced on the floor. Blood dripped between his fingers from his nose. Kneecapped man, writhing, clutching his ruined leg, pistol out of reach, teeth bared in a rictus of pain. Leader, unconscious, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Elena, crouched behind the pillar, eyes wide but steady, one hand pressed against her bodyguard's wounded shoulder to stanch the flow. Blood soaked her suit, dark and slick. The bodyguard, pale, lips tight, breathing fast but not shallow enough to scream lung puncture. The elevator, doors gaping open, interior spattered with concrete dust and the terror of the people still huddled inside. Silence fell in a strange, fragmented way, broken only by the BMW alarm, the wet hitching of the injured men's breath, and the faint, ragged shouts of other employees finally reacting on upper levels. It had been 12 seconds. Darian realized that with the eerie clarity that came after adrenaline spikes. 12 awful, stretched, infinite seconds between the elevator ding and the moment his brain decided the immediate killing was over. He'd never forget any of them. A strangled, staticky sound burbled against his chest. For a wild second, he thought it was the building protesting. Then he realized his radio, miraculously still attached despite the bullet, had come half back to life, voice mangled by the jammer. "HLT, what's NB?" Debbie's voice fractured through the interference. He groped for the device, fingers clumsy, and jammed the transmit button. "Shots fired," he rasped. His throat burned from the choke. Level B1. 3 suspects down, 1 executive protection injured. CO secure. The words came out in a rhythm he didn't have to think about. Report, assess, prioritize. He heard his own voice and realized with a jolt that it sounded like his old squad reports, made from behind crumbling walls and burning vehicles. "This is not a drill," he added, just in case anyone upstairs still thought he was overreacting. Whatever Len had been about to say died in the sudden maelstrom of noise. Voices overlapped in his earpiece: security, operations, someone from legal, someone from PR, all trying to talk at once. For a second, the channel was nothing but raw panic. "Shut up," Darian snarled at the plastic. Astonishingly, they did. "Ops," he said, forcing his voice steady. "Lock down all garage access. No vehicles in or out. Notify police, EMS, and external security. These 3 are armed and may have accomplices." "But Debbie started. "They're not dead," Darian said, glancing at the groaning men on the floor. "And someone paid them good money. Nobody sends just 3 into a building like this without backup. Lock it down." He met Elena's eyes over the distance between them, daring her to contradict him. She didn't. Her jaw clenched. She nodded once. "Do what he says," she said, her voice low but carrying. The weight of it hit him harder than the bullet had. He was just a contractor. A single dad who took this job because it paid slightly more than the night shift at the warehouse, and it meant he could pick Mira up from school on time. He wasn't supposed to be the one giving orders to a woman whose decisions moved millions of dollars. But right now, in this ugly underbelly of her glass tower, he was the one who'd moved. And everyone knew it. The first sirens wailed in the distance a moment later, thin and rising. The police turned the garage into a crime scene within minutes. Blue and red lights strobed against the concrete, casting the fallen men into an obscene parody of a nightclub dance floor. Officers in standard patrol uniforms flooded B1, their eyes wide, hands tight on their weapons, moving with the controlled urgency of people who knew they were late to something important. Then the detectives came. Then the tactical response unit, their armored vests and heavy boots a grim echo from another life. They cuffed the assassins where they lay, medics swarming to check pulses and stabilize injuries. The kneecapped man screamed again as they moved his leg. The tall man cursed in a steady stream, the words slurred around swelling lips. The leader woke as they rolled him to his side. His eyes met Darian's for a sliver of a moment. There was no hatred in them. No fear. Just a cold, measuring respect, and something else that made Darian's stomach knot. Amusement. As if the man had found what he'd been looking for. They hauled him upright and marched him toward the waiting elevator, his hands zip-tied behind his back, blood trickling from a cut at his hairline. "Name?" a detective asked. The leader smiled, slow and mocking. "Maintenance," he said. The detective rolled his eyes. "Cute. We'll get it the hard way." The leader's gaze flicked back to Darian one last time. "Maybe you will," he said softly. "Maybe you won't." Then the doors closed, taking him away. Darian sat on the edge of a concrete bumper, fingers pressed to the bruise blooming under his collar where the radio had caught the bullet. His vest was half unzipped, shirt torn, sweat cooling on his skin in clammy patches. Every few seconds, someone new appeared in his peripheral vision. A paramedic shoving an oxygen mask at his face. He waved it away. A uniformed officer asking if he'd been hit anywhere else. He shook his head. A building manager wringing his hands, babbling about liability. Darian ignored him. His eyes kept drifting to the elevator. The doors stayed open now, blocked by a piece of bright orange tape and 2 sawhorses someone had dragged in from a storage closet. The interior looked normal again, if you ignored the scuff marks on the threshold and the lingering scent of gunpowder. He'd stood in a lot of metal boxes that had become graves. This one hadn't. His hands started shaking. It caught him by surprise. He'd made it through 12 seconds of controlled chaos without a tremor. Now that everything was technically over, now that uniforms and rank and procedure had flooded the scene, his body decided it was safe to realize how close he'd come to not going home. He clenched his fists in his lap, forcing the tremor down. "Mr. Holt?" The voice came from his right. Calm. Precise. He looked up. Elena Kwan stood there with her injured arm in a neat white sling, the bullet having passed cleanly through the bodyguard and nicked her jacket but not her skin. She'd changed into a fresh suit already, someone must have raided her private closet upstairs, and her dark hair was pulled back into an even tighter knot than usual. Her eyes, though. They looked different. Less distant. Sharper. She sat beside him on the concrete barrier as if this were a bench in a park instead of a stained block in a crime scene. The contrast would have been almost funny if his system wasn't still flooded with adrenaline. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "That your official statement?" he asked, surprised at how rough his voice sounded. A corner of her mouth twitched. "Legal will write something more polished." But before they do, she let the sentence hang. He waited. "You saved my life," she said simply. He opened his mouth to deflect, to say something about just doing his job, about it being a team effort, about the bodyguard taking a bullet too, but the words felt wrong in his throat. He hadn't done just his job. He'd broken protocol, ignored orders, and made the building's executive security manager look like a fool. He'd also put his hands on 3 armed men with nothing between his chest and their bullets but a cheap plastic radio. He closed his mouth again. "Your daughter," Elena said quietly. "Mira, is it?" The sound of his girl's name coming from this woman's lips jolted him. "How?" "I ask for a file on every team member assigned to my floor," she said. "Eventually. I don't always have time to read them. Tonight I made time." He didn't like the thought of his life summarized in a neat stack of HR bullet points. Single father. Prior service. Medical discharge. Hire date. Performance reviews. "Myra's 13, he said, because silence felt heavier. "She thinks I work in building security operations." He added air quotes with his fingers, the gesture automatic and self-mocking. Elena tilted her head. "You don't?" "I mean, technically," he gestured at the chaos around them. "This is a little above my pay grade." "Not anymore," she said. He blinked. She looked out over the garage, at the chalk outlines and evidence markers, at the uniforms and suits and people on phones. Her jaw tightened. "They weren't here to rob us," she said. "They weren't here to make a political statement. They were here for me." He'd known that already, on some bone-deep level. Hearing her say it out loud made his skin crawl. He remembered the leader's expression as they dragged him away. That weighing amusement. "Not just you," his instincts whispered. "You were a bonus." "They knew my schedule," Elena went on. "They knew my vehicle, my usual exit, the fact that I occasionally send my driver home early when I have late calls. They knew where I'd be, when I'd be there, and which parts of the building's response they could bypass with plausible-looking maintenance uniforms." She turned to him. "They didn't know about you." Heat rose in his face. "Ma'am, anyone with half a brain watching the cameras could have." "No," she interrupted gently. "They couldn't. Because you weren't on the cameras." He frowned. "I'm everywhere down here. I walk the same routes every night." "You were in the blind spots," she said. "The areas the cameras don't cover properly. The zones the building committee vetoed adding more equipment to because it was unnecessary expense. You walked those patterns on your own, without anyone telling you to." He thought back through the evening. The flickering bulbs. The angle of the gray van. The exact place he'd paused by pillar B3C where the column of concrete blocked one camera and the lens distortion of the next left a thin strip of invisibility. He'd learned to live in blind spots years ago. Apparently, the habit stuck. "Still doesn't make me special," he muttered. Elena's gaze didn't let him look away. "You assessed the threat before anyone else," she said. "You pushed past resistance from your superiors. You acted in a 12-second window in which most people would have frozen. You disarmed 3 train attackers with no weapon of your own and only 1 significant injury among civilians. Mr. Holt, if that's not special, I need to revise my definition." He stared at the oil stains on the floor. A small, bitter laugh escaped him before he could swallow it. "You know what my last performance review said?" he asked. "I do," she said. He waited for her to quote it. Detail-oriented almost to a fault. Struggles with adapting to corporate culture. Overinvested in low-probability security scenarios. She didn't. Instead, she said, it was wrong. His chest tightened. The sirens outside faded as vehicles switched off their lights, settling into the long, grinding work of statements and evidence in politics. Far above them, the city kept moving, oblivious. Myra's going to be scared when she sees the news, he said quietly. She's going to be proud, Elena countered. He didn't argue. He couldn't imagine the look on his daughter's face if she saw him on TV, grainy garage footage replayed between anchors' polished voices. The thought made his stomach twist. Take the night, Elena said, rising. In fact, take the week. HR will process it. In the meantime, a car will take you home. I don't want you driving yourself after this. He bristled. I'm fine. You're shaking, she said gently. He looked down. His hands, traitorous and honest, trembled in his lap. I'll take the car, he said. She nodded. Mr. Holt? Yeah? This isn't over, she said. He knew that too. As she walked away, flanked now by 2 replacement bodyguards in tactical suits, Darian felt the words settle on his shoulders like a weight, and like armor. He wasn't sure which yet. The ride home blurred. City lights smeared past the tinted windows of the black sedan in streaks of white and red. The driver didn't say anything beyond a brisk, "Evening, sir," when Darian first climbed in. After that, the man focused on the road with the intensity of someone who knew their passenger had had too much noise for one night. Darian appreciated it. He sat with his head tipped back against the leather, fingers absently rubbing the bruise under his collar where the radio had saved his life. His mind replayed the 12 seconds on a loop, each frame sharper than the last. The click of the leader's thumb on the jammer. The way the tall man's nose broke under his elbow. The sickening bend of the kneecapped man's leg. The moment his finger had tightened on the trigger, aiming for the assassin's chest, and shifted. He'd made a choice. He knew some people would question it. They'd ask why he hadn't just taken the kill shot. Why he'd given a dangerous man the chance to stand in a courtroom instead of ending the threat in the garage. His answer, if anyone asked, would be simple. He hadn't stopped being a soldier when he'd turned in his badge and weapon. But he had started being a father long before that. The idea of putting a bullet through another man's heart in front of terrified civilians in a corporate parking garage tasted different than doing it behind a sandbag wall while mortars fell. He'd aimed lower. He'd still stopped the threat. He'd just chosen a different scar. The car pulled up in front of his building, the tired red brick one with the flickering lobby light and the perpetually broken elevator. Thanks, Darian said, hand on the door handle. The driver cleared his throat. For what it's worth, sir. I saw the footage they managed to pull before the feed cut. Darian stiffened. The driver met his gaze in the rearview mirror. You did good. Compliments sat on Darian's skin like things that didn't quite belong there. He nodded once, awkwardly, and stepped out into the cool night air. The city's hum felt different now. Edgier. Like every shadow could hide someone who knew his name. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, his knee complaining at every step. The hallway smelled like old carpet and somebody's burned dinner. Lights buzzed overhead, one of them strobing in a way that always made him a little dizzy. He paused outside apartment 3B, listening. Laughter. The canned kind from a sitcom, spilling tinnily through the door. He exhaled, tension he hadn't realized he was holding loosening a notch. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. Dad? Mira appeared in the hallway between their cramped kitchen and the sitting room, socks sliding slightly on the hardwood. Her hair was yanked up into a messy bun, a pencil stuck through it like a stake. She wore his old army t-shirt as a sleep shirt, the hem hitting mid-thigh. Her eyes went straight to the torn collar of his shirt. Her mouth flattened. What happened? She demanded. He'd told himself on the ride over that he'd ease into it. That he'd downplay. That he'd say there'd been a situation at work, it was handled, he was fine. He'd lie with the gentle, padded words adults used when they wanted to protect kids from the full weight of reality. Looking at her now, the sharp focus in her gaze, the way her shoulders squared, he realized two things. She wasn't a kid in the way he kept pretending she was. And she'd smell a lie the second it left his mouth. He swallowed. There was an incident at the garage, he said. Some guys came from Miss Kwan. They were armed. I dealt with it. Her eyes widened. Armed like, armed? Like gun-armed? Yes. And you dealt with it like. She made vague martial arts gestures in the air. Like the training I keep nagging you to take seriously when we practice, he said. She stared at him for a long second. Then she hurled herself forward and wrapped her arms around his waist so hard his bruised ribs protested. He hugged her back, closing his eyes, burying his face in her hair. It smelled like coconut shampoo and the faint residue of the cheap perfume she'd found at the drugstore and declared grown up. I saw something on my phone, she mumbled into his chest. Evie's mom had the news on. There was this banner. Attempted assassination at Halcyon Tower. I called you, but it just kept going to voicemail. Signal jammer, he said. I turned my radio off at 1.2. You always tell me not to turn my phone off, she accused, pulling back enough to glare up at him. Do as I say, not as I do, he tried. She didn't laugh. Her eyes filled instead. I thought, she shut her mouth, pressing her lips together until they went bloodless. I thought maybe this time you weren't coming home either. The words hit harder than any punch. Either. She didn't remember the day the casualty assistance officer had come to their base housing door in a pressed uniform, had held against his chest like a shield. She'd been 3, toddling in circles in the living room with a stuffed giraffe clutched in one fist. But some part of her had absorbed the echo. He cupped the back of her head gently. I'm here, he said. I'm okay. I promise you, I'm not going anywhere I don't have to. She sniffed, wiping her nose on the sleeve of his shirt. Ms. Kwan, she asked. Is she? She's fine, he said. Shaken up. Her bodyguard took a bullet in the shoulder. He'll be okay too. The bad guys are in custody. For real? Like, prison for life custody? That's not my call, he said. But they're not going to bother us tonight. She searched his face, as if trying to decide how much to believe. Come on, he said softly. It's late. You should be asleep. You should be at work, she countered. Took the night off, he said. Boss's orders. Her eyebrows shot up. Wow. She must really like you now. Don't start, he groaned. But her grin, quick and fierce, loosened something tight in his chest. They ended up on the couch, a blanket around both of them, the TV playing some show neither was really watching. Mira asked questions in fits and starts. How many men? Did they talk? Did he get scared? He answered honestly where he could. Yes, they talked a little. Yes, I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you can't move. It just means the moving matters more. She nodded like she was filing that away. At some point, she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder, breath evening out. He muted the TV and sat there in the dim flicker of the screensaver, watching the shadows shift on their cheap curtains. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. He eased his arm out from under Myra's head, laid a folded sweatshirt in its place, and picked up the phone. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Holt. This is Detective Marquez, a woman's voice said. We spoke briefly at the scene. He remembered her, late 30s, hair in a tight braid, eyes that saw more than people wanted them to. Yes, ma'am, he said. Sorry to call so late. I wanted to let you know we ran preliminaries on your 3 friends. Let me guess. Clean IDs, no priors, nothing useful. On paper, sure, she said. But that's not what worries me. He leaned against the kitchen counter, looking back toward the couch to make sure Mira stayed asleep. What does? Their phones, Marquez said. Burners. Wiped. We expected that. What we didn't expect was what we found in the van. They had detailed schematics of Halcyon Tower, sure, but they also had dossiers. His stomach tightened. On Elena? On her. On her executive team. On regular staff who occupy key choke points in the building. And one more. He knew what she was going to say before she said it. You. The word hung between them like a suspended blade. Me, he forced out. A surprising amount, Marquez said. Your deployment history. Your discharge. Your hire date. Rough sketches of your nightly patrol patterns. The room tilted for a second. How the hell would they get that? He asked. We're working on it, she said. Could be a data breach. Could be an insider. Could be someone selling information for a price they thought wouldn't matter. His mind flickered to Len's smug face, to the way he'd brushed off Darian's concerns, to the too slick smiles of certain board members he'd shepherded from limo to elevator. It gets weirder, Marquez said. Whoever compiled this didn't just list you as security. They flagged you as variable asset. Variable. Not threat. Not obstacle. Something to account for. An X in the equation. You think they were planning for me, he said slowly. I think they were trying to, she said. But something in the dossiers is off. The version of you in their file? He's a guy who sticks strictly to protocol. Who calls things in, defers to chain of command, doesn't improvise. Their timeline shows you staying on B3 while Ms. Kwan walks out to her car and gets taken before the support team even arrives. He pictured it, himself dutifully circling the lower level, checking the same locks again, trusting the system while Elena walked into an ambush one floor up. The assassins had counted on him being predictable. They'd been wrong. Someone underestimates you, Marquez said. They won't make that mistake twice. His mouth went dry. You think they'll try again, he said. I think people who invest in this level of planning don't like to fail, she said. And I think your boss is going to need better security than a contract crew and a third-party rapid response team. Whether she realizes that yet or not. She realizes it, came another voice in the background of the call. Marquez cursed softly. Ms. Kwan, I was going to. I asked for the patch-through, Elena said. Her tone was crisp, but under it he heard fatigue. Mr. Holt? Yes, ma'am. I'd like you in my office tomorrow at 9, she said. Assuming you can find childcare or bring Mira with you. We'll make space. He looked at his sleeping daughter, sprawled now across the couch with one arm flung over her eyes. What for? He asked, though a part of him already knew. To discuss a change in your role, she said. And in your compensation. Halcyon is going to war, Mr. Holt. I don't intend to lose. I need someone who knows how to think in 12-second windows. His pulse thudded in his ears. He'd spent the last few years trying to be less of the man he'd been overseas. Softer around the edges. More civilian. For Myra's sake as much as his own. Now the world he'd built around her was trying to drag him back into a version of himself he wasn't sure he liked, but knew he was good at. I'll be there, he said. Good, Elena replied. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start figuring out who wanted me dead. The line clicked, leaving him with the fading hum of the fridge and the soft, wheezy rhythm of Myra's breath. He stood in his tiny kitchen for a long time, phone loose in his hand. He knew what the logical choice was. He could say no. He could keep his current job, patch the blind spots in the garage, walk his routes, and hope that lightning didn't strike twice. He could put his daughter's stability ahead of the adrenaline thrill that had roared through his veins when he'd moved tonight. Or he could step forward into something bigger, messier, more dangerous. He could help reshape the way a company that touched millions of lives thought about security, from superficial badge checks and cameras to something that actually respected the reality of the world. He could hunt the people who'd put his daughter's name in a folder. His fingers tightened around the phone. In the living room, Mira snorted in her sleep and rolled over, muttering, "Kick his butt, Dad," in a barely audible mumble. He smiled, small and fierce. Decision made itself. Halcyon Tower looked different in daylight. The next morning, the glass facade caught the early sun and threw it back in a restrained shimmer, as if the building were pretending it had not been the site of an attempted assassination 13 hours earlier. The lobby buzzed with a double layer of energy, the usual corporate rush and a nervous undercurrent of people who'd seen too many headlines. Darian entered through the side entrance, Mira at his elbow. She'd insisted on coming. "Somebody put my dad in a folder," she'd said as she pulled on her jean jacket. "I have questions." He'd tried to convince her to go to school, promising to fill her in later. She'd folded her arms and stared him down. "Dad. If someone tried to kill your boss and had a file on you, do you think I'm going to concentrate on algebra?" He'd given up. Now, as they crossed the polished stone floor, Myra's eyes darted everywhere. Armed security from an external firm stood at every entrance, their uniforms a darker shade than Halcyon's in-house staff. A portable metal detector had sprouted in front of the elevator banks overnight, manned by 2 guards with handheld wands. "Whoa," Mira murmured. "They went full airport." "Temporary," Darian said. "They'll calm down once the dust settles." "If they're smart, they won't," she muttered. Pride flickered through him. They were waved through with minimal fuss. Elena had apparently added their names to some urgent list, and ushered into a private elevator by a nervous-looking assistant who recognized Darian from the garage footage and looked at him like he'd stepped out of a movie. "Ms. Kwan's waiting," the assistant said as the doors closed. Top floor. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Mira watched the floor numbers tick upward, hands shoved deep in her jacket pockets. "You okay?" he asked. She shrugged. "Depends what okay means today." He huffed a quiet laugh. "Fair." He wanted to tell her it would all be fine. He didn't. When the doors slid open on 49, they stepped into a quieter world. The executive floor's carpets muffled footsteps. The walls bore minimalist art instead of the generic motivational posters downstairs. It smelled faintly of coffee and expensive printer ink. Elena's assistant led them into a glass-walled corner office that overlooked half the city. Elena stood by the window, jacket off, sling replaced by a sleek black support brace that looked almost like an accessory. Detective Marquez leaned against a credenza, arms crossed, expression neutral. When Mira saw the view, her mouth fell open. "Whoa," she whispered. "You can see, like, everything." Elena smiled faintly. "That's the idea." Her gaze shifted to Darian, then to Mira. "You must be Mira," she said. Mira straightened, clearly torn between awe and teenage suspicion. "Yes, ma'am." "Your father tells me you're good at asking questions," Elena said. Myra's eyes flicked to him, startled. He hadn't told Elena that. Which meant she'd made her own deductions. "I am," Mira said cautiously. "Good," Elena replied. "You may have some today. For now, though, I'd like to speak with your father for a few minutes in private. Detective Marquez will stay. You can sit on the couch there and listen, if you're comfortable with that." Mira weighed the adults, the room, the invisible currents of power. Then she nodded and perched on the edge of the sleek gray sofa, hands folded tightly in her lap. Darian took the chair opposite Elena's desk. "Mr. Holt," she said. "I'll be direct. I want to create a new position at Halcyon. Director of Protective Strategy. I want you in it." The title hung in the air like a test. "Director," Mira mouthed silently behind him. Darian kept his face neutral. "You have plenty of ex-military applicants," he said. "Officers. Specialists. People who did this at a higher level. What I have," she said, "are people who know how to write beautiful PowerPoints about risk mitigation. I don't have someone who can look at a gray van and feel the wrongness in their bones before a single shot is fired." She slid a folder across the desk. "Your file," she said. "The real one, not the watered-down version HR gave me." He glanced at it but didn't open it. "My medical discharge papers are in there," he said. "So are the notes about the nightmares. The hypervigilance. The other fun stuff. Yes, she said. There's also a commendation for pulling 2 men out of a burning vehicle while ammunition cooked off around you. A line about you spotting an IED that 3 other people missed. And a handwritten note from your CO that says, and I quote, Holt's instincts are the only reason this unit isn't planning 3 more funerals. Heat crawled up his neck. That was a bad week, he muttered. It's the week that got you medically retired instead of dead, she replied. I can't change what the military did with that. But I can decide what Halcyon does with it. She leaned back. I don't need someone who's never been afraid, she said. I need someone who's been afraid and moved anyway. Yesterday showed me who that is. Detective Marquez cleared her throat. For the record, she said, I don't love the idea of pulling my star witness into the heart of the target we're still investigating. Elena nodded. Your objection is noted. But, Marquez continued, she's right about one thing. Whoever's behind this is going to adapt. They'll study what went wrong. They'll plan around yesterday's failure. Having you on the inside, shaping how this place thinks about threat, might be the difference between round 2 going our way or theirs. Darian looked at his hands. They'd stopped shaking. What about Mira? He asked. I've read the dossiers, Elena said. They already know she exists. That she matters to you. That knowledge doesn't go away because you stay in your current job. If anything, it makes you more vulnerable because you have less say in the security decisions that affect both of you. Mira spoke up from the couch, surprising all of them. Excuse me, she said. 3 adult heads turned. If they know about me, she said, voice steady but eyes bright, does that mean I'm, like, leverage? Marquez's expression softened. It means we're going to take precautions, she said. Extra patrols near your school. Communication protocols. Maybe some self-defense classes. I already do that with Dad, Mira said. Then you're ahead of most kids, Marquez replied. Mira nodded slowly. I don't want to be the reason he doesn't do something important, she said quietly. The words landed heavier than she might have intended. Darian turned in his chair to look at her. You're the reason I do anything, he said. That doesn't change. I know, she said. But, if you can stop more guys like that before they get close to people's cars? It's not just Ms. Kwan. What about all the people who park there who don't have you watching? What about their kids? He swallowed hard. Sometimes, the clarity you needed came from someone who still had homework due. He turned back to Elena. What are the terms? He asked. She smiled faintly. A significant raise. Full benefits for you and Mira. A budget line you control for upgrading physical and digital security. The authority to overrule middle management when safety is at stake. And when I piss off the board, he asked. I'll handle the board, she said. He believed her. He also knew this would paint a target on him bigger than any he'd carried before. But then again, the target was already there. The difference would be whether he faced it with his hands tied by protocol or with enough authority to move first. He extended his hand. Okay, he said. Director of Protective Strategy it is. Her grip was firm. Welcome to the war, she said. Mira pumped her fist silently on the couch. Detective Marquez shook her head with a half-smile. I'll get you the full forensics briefing this afternoon. If you're going to be designing countermeasures, you should see exactly what they brought to the party. Deal, Darian said. As they left the office an hour later, with thick packets of preliminary reports under his arm and a new badge on his lanyard that read director instead of contractor, Darian felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement. Not exactly. Purpose. The first week in his new role was a blur of meetings, floor plans, and hard truths. He walked every inch of Halcyon Tower with a clipboard and a critical eye, mapping blind spots, choke points, and vulnerabilities. He shadowed night shifts and day shifts, watched how people actually used the building instead of how designers imagined they would. He had difficult conversations with managers who didn't want to reroute foot traffic or give up convenient shortcuts. He sat in a conference room with IT and debated firewall rules and access control lists until his head hurt. He sparred, verbally, with Len, who suddenly found himself reporting to the man he'd dismissed as over-militarizing things. Through it all, the memory of those 12 seconds sharpened his focus. Every policy he wrote, every recommendation he made, every camera angle he insisted on changing was a brick in a wall he hoped would keep the next wave of danger out. Mira complained that he was working too much. Then she started coming by after school, sprawling on his office couch with her homework while he sketched out evacuation routes on a whiteboard. Sometimes she'd point at a path he'd drawn and say, "What if there's a fire on that staircase?" He'd revise. Sometimes she'd say, "If I were a bad guy, I'd come in here instead," tapping a service entrance on the map. He added extra locks. He didn't tell her how much that perspective mattered. He just listened. Detective Marquez kept him looped in on the external investigation. The assassins' real names turned out to be a mess of aliases and forged passports. The leader's fingerprints matched partials recovered from 2 unsolved hits in other cities. They still didn't know who had hired them. But they knew this much: whoever it was, they had resources. The van was traced to a shell company with ownership structures that looped through 3 countries and back again. The money trail on the burners led to cryptocurrency tumblers and dead ends. "You're up against professionals," Marquez said over coffee one afternoon. "The kind who treat assassination like a line item on a budget." He hated that description. He also knew it was accurate. "You think they'll try this building again?" he asked. Marquez considered. "If you install half the upgrades you're talking about, this place will be harder to crack than some government facilities," she said. "Smart money says they'll try to hit Ms. Kwan somewhere else. A conference. A charity event. The airport. So I plan for everywhere," he said. "Now you're getting it," she replied. He went home that night and stared at his calendar. Myra's parent-teacher conference circled in blue. Elena's upcoming keynote at a tech summit circled in red. He'd promised his daughter he'd be at both. He wasn't sure the world would let him keep that promise. The first big test of his new role came 10 days after the garage. Elena insisted on keeping her commitment to deliver the keynote at the tech summit across town, despite half the board urging her to appear by video instead. "If we show them I'm scared," she said in a strategy meeting, "we've already lost." "You don't have to be scared to be smart," Darian countered. "I'm bringing you," she said. "That's my compromise." He'd spent the rest of the week designing a layered security plan for the event: alternate routes, vetted drivers, a second vehicle as decoy, advanced teams sweeping the venue. He looped Marquez in on every step. She promised extra plainclothes officers in the crowd. The morning of the summit, he stood in Elena's office as she adjusted her blazer in the reflection of her darkened window. "How's Mira?" she asked. "Nervous," he said. "She thinks you're walking into a trap." "Is she wrong?" He thought of the unknown client still out there, the dossiers in the van, the time-stamped notes about Elena's routines. "We're not walking into it blind," he said. "That's not the same as safe," she replied. "No," he agreed. They rode down together in the private elevator, flanked by the bodyguard, now fully recovered, and 2 members of the external security team. Darian checked his comms, his earpiece snug, his suit jacket hanging just so to conceal the new company-authorized sidearm at his hip. Carrying again felt both familiar and foreign. As the elevator doors opened onto the garage, the same level B1, now bristling with cameras and extra lights, Darian's chest tightened. The bullet marks had been patched. The camera domes were new. The BMW had been replaced by a different car in a different space. The ghost of those 12 seconds lingered anyway. Elena's gaze flicked to him. "You good?" she murmured. "Ask me again in an hour," he said. She nodded. They reached the black SUV waiting at the base of the ramp. It idled with quiet menace, armored panels invisible under its glossy paint. As the bodyguard opened the rear door for Elena, a flash of movement at the edge of Darian's vision made every nerve in him light up. A delivery truck rolling just a little too slowly past the garage entrance. The driver's head turned just a little too far to watch them. Darian's hand shot up. "Hold," he snapped. Elena froze with one foot in the car. The security team tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Darian stepped out from under the overhang, into the mouth of the driveway. He let his body language go relaxed, his expression bored, as if he were just a guy annoyed at traffic. The truck crawled closer. His eyes tracked the plate, the logo, the numbers on the side. He'd spent the past week memorizing the delivery schedules for this building and half the block. This truck didn't belong. He moved to the edge of its path and held up a hand as if to wave it through or flag it down. The driver's gaze flicked to his face. There was a tiny pause. Darian smiled blandly and took one slow half-step closer, just enough to see past the glare on the windshield. The man behind the wheel wore a uniform with the right colors but the wrong logo, slightly off-center on the breast. And his eyes. Darian knew those eyes. Not the man himself. But the look. That flat, assessing calm. He'd seen it in another man's face in the back of a police elevator, hands zip-tied behind his back. He felt the moment change like a pressure drop before a storm. His hand went to the radio clipped under his jacket. "Lock the building," he said quietly, the words for Elena, for the guards, for anyone on the frequency. The driver's lips twitched. As if he'd been waiting for that exact phrase. The truck's engine roared as the driver slammed his foot down. It surged forward. Toward the ramp. Toward them. Toward the glass and steel tower full of people who still thought yesterday's news story was a one-off. Darian Holt stepped into its path. He didn't know yet if he could stop what was coming. He only knew one thing with absolute clarity. He was done being the variable in somebody else's equation. He was going to rewrite it. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.